we do have to bring up, of course, one guy who isn't necessarily hitting the cover off of the ball recently, and that is one Ian Happ. I think that every Cubs fan, I think, has noticed that he's hitting for decidedly less power than he has in the past. I think you just look at 4 home runs. I mean, that's not great. And he, I think, has 13 doubles on the season. His OPS this season, 83 points lower than last season. In fact, his OPS, I believe, is right around where Matt Shaw is, who we just talked about not hitting for a ton of power. And so I think that you start to have a lot of different questions about Ian Happ, and kind of it starts with, is everything okay with him health-wise? We know he missed time earlier this season with an injury. Did he rush back from it? What's going on with that? Is there an approach difference at the plate with him? And so I'm going to posit this question to you, Frank. It's not only, do you want to, kind of speculate about what's changed about Ian Happ, but I also think, do you continue to bat him in that top spot in the lineup? Does he get on base enough to satisfy you in that spot? Or do you think that he more often is going to need to be dropped in the lineup because he's just not hitting the ball with enough zip?
Well, I don't mind having him in the leadoff spot because his drop in OPS is almost entirely the drop in slug. His on
Mm-hmm.
base percentage is still where it usually is. It's still in that acceptable range. One of the other things I've noticed about Hap is he used to be a lot freer on the bases. You'd see him take some extra bases, steal some bases, and you're just not seeing that out of him. And
Mm-hmm.
so he's still getting his walks like he always has. And the fact that he's always been a high on base guy, and he's always been kind of a moderate slug guy. And in the David Ross years, Ross always batted him third, which was not a good spot for him. Having him in the leadoff spot is a better spot for him because he does get on base enough to set the table for Tucker, Suzuki, Armstrong, Pete
Mm-hmm.
Crow, everybody
Yeah.
who comes after. And I will continue to call him Pete Crow.
I do. And I do. I'm assuming you have to kind of imagine that if Cub fans were to say they wanted Ian Happ to drop from that leadoff spot, one would imagine that those fans would want PCA to be in that spot. But you look at PCA, and we've talked about the fact that he barely draws any walks. He has 13 on the entire season, and he has 70 strikeouts. I just don't. As much as it would be great to have that kind of guy who's been hitting for the pop that he does, the speed that he does have a solid batting average. You have to look at that walk rate. And I agree with the decision to basically bat him, in the meat of that order behind guys like Suzuki and Tucker that get on base more consistently.
Yeah, Pete Crow is the hitter that we always wished Sean Dunston would have been.
Mm-hmm. Amen to that.
Not no very few walks, swings at everything, but he gets his bat on everything.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I loved that he did in the last homestand was there were a few games he was getting just gobbled up on breaking balls down out of the zone. He was swinging them, and just K's like crazy. Then all of a sudden he golfed one into the seats,
Mm-hmm.
and that ended that.
Yeah.
It's nice to have a guy who can adjust like that. But he's a guy you've because of his pop, you've got to have him in the middle of the lineup, and it's tough because this is kind of like what I mean. I'm not going to sit here and say that Pete Crow-Armstrong is Willie Mays. It's not fair to him to do that.
No.
But when the Giants had Mays, it was the same thing where Mays was so fast, but he hit with such power that they had to put him in the middle of the lineup, which took the stolen base kind of out of his rotation. He had like one 30-30 year or 2 30-30 years.
Yeah.
And also 30-30 wasn't the first player where they really paid attention to 30-30 was Bobby Bonds, who played with Mays. But when you've got a guy in the middle of the lineup, you can't turn him loose like you normally would because of the bats that are coming up behind him.
And it kind of makes you wonder if maybe you start to put Seiya behind him in the lineup just to give him a little bit more of an opportunity to run, especially with how often they're willing to run with Kyle Tucker as well. I mean, don't sleep on the fact that Kyle Tucker has 16 stolen bases on the season. Like he's a speed threat too. And obviously it's going to be harder for him to steal third base if PCA is on first and you want to move both of them. But I think it's a good problem ultimately for the Cubs to have in that respect. But I also do think you still want to see some power come back into Ian Happ's bat, just because
Yeah.
aside from those times he's leading the game off, you do want that power threat to be there at the top of the lineup, especially if you're going to end up having a guy like it's a day like Justin Turner is batting, low in the order or something like that. You're eventually going to want another power threat to be in the lineup ahead of guys like Tucker and Suzuki.
Well, also you want, because Matt Shaw is now down at the bottom of the order getting on base, you
Yep.
want to have some pop at the top of the lineup, because after the first inning, the next time he comes up, there's a pretty good chance Matt Shaw's going to be on base somewhere.
Yeah, and like we said, just the professional at bats that he's logging, I think that he's ultimately going to, be getting on base. I think his walk rate is going to kind of continue to improve. I definitely think that that's something that we're seeing, like a lot of maturity that he's showcasing at the plate, and I really think that he's going to start to do a lot better. And I will point out, Ian Happ this season with runners in scoring position, batting .254, which is not the best mark I've ever seen from a guy like that. But I do think that we've seen him turn it on in the second half of seasons. It would not be stunning at all. And he had these like remarkably consistent seasons that he kind of stacked. And some of that was due to the fact that he was able to hit so much better in the second half of the season. And that could ultimately prove really beneficial, especially if like PCA goes through a bit of a slump, which you would expect from a second year guy, that maybe that something like that will happen. But I just think ultimately that's something Cubs fans need to keep an eye on, is what Ian Happ's going to be doing at the top of that lineup.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of had the feeling something was up when the Cubs went into Cincinnati and went into Pittsburgh, and Happ just didn't pick it up.
Yeah,
Like,
those are both
those were his
spots that he
playgrounds.
always rakes. But yeah, like I said, there's always the possibility he's going to flip the switch. He's done it a lot of times in his career. It's not like he's, some decrepit old guy. He's 30. Like that's, not the youngest guy in baseball by any means, but certainly a guy that's still capable of really going on a nice tear. And I wouldn't rule it out for an Ian Happ